Good morning, everyone. Well, as Ali has said, I'm Eduardo Penabad. I work at ECMWF in the C3S seasonal team. That's at least the name you used to know it last time we met in person. We were 2 people, now that we are 3. It's called Climate Predictions and Projections. And I'm here I'm grateful to be the first speaker on the last day of the event after the dinner, because that means that probably the level of scrutiny to this talk, it would be a bit lower than I can be. I thought it was a good idea to give the talk a bit lighter tone. So that's it. So if you have ever listened to one of those TED Talks about how to give impressive presentations, they all say that you need to engage with the audience in the very first minute. So I'm trying to do so by showing you this. A dish with roasted chestnuts. You might think it's random, but it is not. And you will find out during the presentation. But this is my audience engage checked. So let's go to the topic. This is a real user requirement that comes from the real user requirements database. So it's there, you can browse it if you have a user, and you will find this kind of user requirements. And the summary is seasonal forecasts are not needed. So that's the end of my talk. I'm happy to take some questions. I have tortured a bit that user requirement because in fact, there are good reasons probably to be there. But I wanted to make a point with that, but I also use some more relevant user requirements for that point. And this is another one. It comes from one of the analysis documents that the EQC team prepares. Oh, I cannot see the clock from here. One of the analysis documents that the EQC team prepares based on all the feedback they gather from the users. And it says that there was a need for guidance in the data selection process, especially for seasonal forecasts. And that document is from September 2020. So if you look at how the seasonal forecasts look like today, September 2022, and you look at the documentation, there's a point there that says something like, how to use the CDS, I cannot read it from here. Yeah, how to use the CDS interactive form, so it's a brief manual to guide users. So you might say, well, we have acted upon that user requirement. But the thing is that the document that this points to was created in December 2018, 2 years before that. So we need to understand what's not matching here, but that's one of the points. Another example there, another real user requirement coming from the user requirement database. It will be great to get updates on seasonal forecasts as the seasons progress. So I'm sure that if we make a poll here, we will get 2, 3, or 4 different answers to what this requirement is asking us. And depending on the level of your familiarity with the catalog, depending on what your role is, you will get a different answer. So that's my first point today, that understanding and, more importantly, acting upon the user requirements is far from being a straightforward task. So that's message number 1. Going back to impressive talks, they recommend you to use random stock pictures, so I did that. And if you use cute animals, it's even better. So why not a chicken and an egg? But it has a point again, because there's some sort of chicken and egg dynamic in one of the things that I wanted to discuss with you today. In principle, the aim of the talk was to talk about user requirements and how they helped us to shape the service. But at the same time, when you start to think about that, you realize that the way the service has been evolving, it has also made change what users might be interested in or what their needs are. And we will have a look at that, and it would also help me to go back a little bit retrospectively to know where we came from and where we are now. So if we look at what happened in the very early evolution of the service, remember, I'm talking today about the seasonal forecast component. We didn't start from scratch. We built up based on previous initiatives, on previous research projects, especially, it's worth mentioning EuroSIP, where the service was based, where the ECMWF, the Met Office and Met of France, and later also NCEP and Japanese Meteorological Agency joined together to create a grand ensemble of seasonal forecasts. And the products they have, they share the data between themselves, but the products they have were mainly graphical products. And that basically explains why we have started with having only graphical products. And that's what it was, the seasonal forecast of C3S on 2016. And the kind of user requirements we had at the time was, can I have the data? Can you send me directly the data? And we did that kind of wild things. We created tailored products, not products at the point, but tailored subsets of the data. We put them in FTPs for users. We send them by email or that kind of crazy stuff. In 2017, we built a better data service based on the awesome infrastructure, which is ECMWF Mars Archive. And we put the data there. We have the web API to interact the users with the data. But then it was just about that. And users started to ask us, I don't really know what's available. I don't really know how can I access the different things. So there was a different need now. Then we got the CDS. It was born. It's a new infrastructure. An improved documentation was there. And it says 2010 there in the slide, but it means from 2010 to nowadays. And then we really started to act to respond to more specific problems of the users. I need this variable, I have this problem, and I would really like to see that product. So that's more or less where we have arrived now. And this is just a simple slide to remind you what the seasonal forecast is about. I won't get into details. You have the QR codes and the URLs there if you want to visit the two places. On the right side, you can see what we have in terms of graphical products. They are not directly linked to the CDS. They are hosted in the service, in the C3S web page. And on the left-hand side, you have the list of the products that we have on the CDS. So we have this summary of data that you can see there coming from 8 different institutions that account for 9 different forecasting systems. And users can interact with that using the CDS API. And the example below about the toolbox is an answer to a real user requirement. A couple of users, in fact, asked us, well, I very much like this graphical product. Can I have the data? And we said, well, not at the moment, but we can help you building a toolbox inside the CDS toolbox, so you will get not exactly the same data that we are plotted, but something very similar. So that's where we are now. And the thing is that our priority in those first stages was about to build the service, to have something to serve the users. So the way we could answer to user requirements, it was not quite the same as it's starting to become more and more to be able to answer to specific user requirements. So our ability to implement user requirements has been evolving as the service evolved. Again, nice picture. And I can talk here about the paradigm of romantic love. Because, I mean, I'm sure that many of the people here in the room have experienced the feeling of having found their other half, their partner, when their interests meet, when their expectations, the life project meets. And that sometimes happens as well between user requirements and the plans. And I have 2 examples for that. One is this one. We were planning to document, we knew from user requirements, and it was clear that there was a need to document best practices in how to access the data. And we were planning to create some workflows in the CDS toolbox to help the users to do that. At the same time, we knew that the users needed training, and the users were expecting some tools. And somehow, magically, the 2 things matched when, from the training point of view, Chris started to talk to us about using Jupyter notebooks as a training tool. I said, well, instead, and that again aligned with the plans for the CDS, where the future of the toolbox would look like much more like a Jupyter notebook does. So we created as the first Jupyter notebook about the seasonal forecast. I think it was released earlier this year. And you have, again, the QR code there, and it was also in Chris's presentation. And this is just an example of the kind of things that we plan to do with the notebook. Another example, it's not that well-cooked as the previous one, but there was some specific users that, hence the quotes in the user needs there. C3S management asked us to have some plots for reporting to the Commission, for reporting here and there, for outreach, to create a flyer. So we started we think, and there was the plan to have verification. And again, it fits again with the general user needs for verification. So we started to plan, well, we will definitely need to have something operational, but we might also be able to create something so the users can run their own verification based on something that we provide to them. So we started to trial, to prototype the kind of things that we could potentially do. So those plots that are just examples. It doesn't mean that they will become products in the future, but it's the example of the kind of things that we could do to solve this, to match those two needs. So key message number 3, very often the design of the service, the plans for the service align very well with what users are expecting. And finally, if you remember from yesterday, Andres talked about the formalized workflow for the user requirements process. It was he presented this workflow. I'm going to focus on the line above to remind you the kind of routes that the users have to reach us, to tell us their needs and to provide us with what they would like to see from us. And I have also added 2 ways, because in the pre-URDB phase, they have been places where we have been collecting information from the users, and it's direct interactions with users, either via Twitter or other social media, or via directly emails. So we have been collecting that. But now we have the URDB process. And there are examples where this can, I mean, yesterday there was the theoretical view on the URD process, and today, coming down to a specific component, we can see an example where this more or less is starting to work. And this is a real example from a user. I don't remember the date, but he asked that he said that it was a pity that we didn't have some variables: the total column water vapor, the total column ice water, and the total column liquid water. So we received that query directly from user support. We analyzed it in the team. We then, that was step number 1. Then step number 2, we contacted the seasonal forecast providers to see how this aligns with their plans to updates, how well they were positioned to provide those variables. So we went back, we went to user support and told them, well, we need to flag this as a user requirement, and that's it, that's done. And now it will go back to the EQC review board, and we will eventually sooner than later, end up publishing those variables from the systems that provided to us. And so key message number 4, the seamless integration of the URDB process is something that is starting to happen now in the second phase of Copernicus for the C3S, but it's still a challenge that we need to tackle in this phase. And finally, if I manage to attract you with the roast chestnuts, I have the last key message, that the appetite for roasted chestnuts is somehow similar to seasonal forecast. And I have just 15 seconds to tell you why. The other day, on Monday, when we were having our pre-GA meeting in the small room, at some point, Chiara was talking about what had happened in the last year, and she mentioned something about there was a high level of appetite from users for seasonal forecasts. And I was sitting in the room, and in front of us in the garden, if you realize, there's a big horse chestnut tree. And somehow, I don't know how, the chestnut and the appetite for seasonal forecast in my brain created the image, because I really do like the smell of roasted chestnuts. But maybe you have experienced that when you try to taste them, they quite don't match the expectation that you have when you smelled it. And to me, it was a very evocative image of what seasonal forecast and the needs for users are. So that was my last key message for today. So thank you very much.
Eduardo, thank you so much for this energetic culinary presentation. Are there any questions on chestnuts or other things? Okay.
Yeah, hi, Eduardo. Not on chestnuts, but so can you explain to us a bit what happens behind the scenes when you get a request and, like you said, you go back to the providers and you have several of them, and you need to get to an agreement with all of them and come back. I mean, do you need to have all of them on the same page, or can you provide some products and not others?
Yeah. So I'm glad that you haven't added the word soil moisture to the question, because I think I don't remember if it was coming from your project, but yeah. Probably Andre is more a relevant person to ask this question, but the thing is that it gets assessed. So, but the problem is that there are things to assess, and one is the relevance and the importance of the user request, but the other one is the feasibility to implement it and how quickly, how swiftly we can react to implement that. So all these things, I mean, there's no one-fits-all recipe to implement the user requirements. So essentially, all these things, it does not depend only on the level of, on the popularity of the request. It also depends on the relevance for the service and the feasibility to implement it. So there's a lot of elements that we account for.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Eduardo.
Thank you.